After the invasion had successfully been repulsed and all the fighting had stopped, many wanted to simply raid all the different citadels around the planet for their own profit. Yet, there was an issue. They didn't have time for crap like that, as everyone needed to focus on survival at this point. The war, not just when the citadels burst up from the ground, but the war itself had damaged much of the planet, and right now, crops need to be regrown to fill everybody's belly. The food needs to be grown to feed the food, because you know what they say, a man can't live on bread alone. He needs a steak. Anybody with even a modicum of understanding realizes it's going to take years and years of hard work to recover. Years that many people believe they actually didn't have. They believed they would simply burn out, they'd age out, and they believed that, well, they wouldn't be able to survive long enough to do it all. That is, until technology reaches out amongst the masses. Not only was there new power generations that were not only being released, also discovered, as well as a hybrid of the new alien and human technologies. There was also new medical technologies that was being permeated throughout the entire planet. This new medical technology took care of everything from pretty much every single virus with the exception of the common cold because it just mutates so damn fast, down to regrowing limbs in a matter of hours, even though you're still going to feel pain if you lost your hand, your foot, or anything else that might be dangling off. Yet they'll still be able to regrow it, though atrophy, well, that's still a thing. Along with that, there's a new method of transportation, a new anti-grav motor that simply went around the world, and now everybody can move around and bring all sorts of supplies around very, very quickly. Not to mention, simple commerce, because you're able to transport everything, usually would take years and years, yet it's being taken care of very quickly. It did take a while before all this technology spread across the world, of course. What wouldn't? Not only did it have to be discovered, it had to be learned. You had to build the factories. Then you gotta build all the devices and ship them out to where they need to be. But once this became a thing, everything just exploded around the planet. All the technology that they had now allowed them to ship food wherever they needed it, ship technology wherever they needed it, ship luxury items wherever they needed it, and everybody was living high on the hog for sure. Especially once they start mixing this technology with AI, which gave them unbelievable amounts of free time. And they wouldn't be able to enjoy this free time at this point if it wasn't for one man. The Sarge had been able to mobilize everything inside the Citadel, one of the only ones that was still standing by the end of the conflict. And he organized the transfer of all the technology out to the masses. He also ushered the end of fighting by keeping command of the Clitris forces. Because of his position, he now commands all the new arrivals all over the planet. They only listen to him if his voice is heard. Thankfully, the man's not a jerk, and he's able to send out these new arrivals to work with humans. And the new arrivals find out that the humans, even given their size, are incredibly strong, insanely fast, excellent engineers that they had no idea that humans could simply grab a box of scraps and build anything, pretty much. They were also surprisingly versatile, able to move from one job to another almost instantaneously. And they realized the humans have the ability to adapt to almost everything. And this frightened them a little bit. This gave them an understanding why, when they showed up on this planet, they immediately got handed their derriere. As many of the new arrivals, as most people call them, even though some people just don't like calling them by their actual name, the Clitris, the population has the ability to actually slow down thanks to this technology that they're getting, allowing them to live for so long, essentially immortal. They simply have to sleep in this device and they don't age. They actually reverse in age back to where they were. All their injuries are healed by the time they wake up. And now they can actually make sure that humanity is stronger and better than it was before. They can take their time and do everything right. Many immediately wanted to travel to stars as they saw all this technology. They believed they could get off this rock and simply go to different planets out there, yet they were immediately disheartened. As it turns out, the radiation belts around all planets inside what we humans call the Goldilocks zone make it impossible to travel from said planets or to them. If anyone was to try, they would very quickly end up being a microwave burrito inside those radiation belts. This is why they need to construct very large gate-like devices to make sure they can travel to another planet like Mars, Venus, or anything outside the Goldilocks zone so they could simply take off from there. It'll be near a century, however, before they are ready to jump to Mars or Venus themselves, as it's going to take a long, long time to build something that large and that complex, and it can't be screwed up. It's going to make the building of the Large Hadron Collider look like somebody putting together a Lego set. While humanity is doing this, they're working with their newcomers, and it turns out that the Clippers have to go through a bit of a shift, culturally speaking. In their culture, it's normal to only allow those of non-high societal standings to access females as a reward for their services to said empire. Give this information along with their basic biology to anybody with a logical brain, and they will be like, what, why? Because this is just odd, considering clitoris females only are fertile while they're in heat. Everybody was confused until they started fingering through the clitoris old culture, and it turned out public intimacy was actually considered normal back in the day, as they could not breed outside that particular ovulation period. The only sidebar for that is they had to watch out during that heat, which they got completely enamored at that point. And when, not if, they got impregnated, they would have 1 to 4 offspring, and this is why only the strongest were now allowed to reproduce, as they worried that their own culture would be led by those who just happened to be virile, but also be very weak. Even though their ovulation period, their heat, was only once every 7 human years, it was enough to make them worry. Flicking through more of the clitoris history, it's actually one of the reasons for their aggressive expansion. The population on one of the planets actually tripled within those 7-year spans, leading to issues, mainly with being able to feed and clothe everybody. To keep from a sudden starvation across that planet and wherever the refugees go, the best young warriors were chosen to prove their worth by taking Earth. This would also have the side effect of deleting the surplus population they had, which meant more food for everyone else. What they were not expecting, though, was humanity to be so defiant, and they used that word a lot. Especially when they looked at their calculated losses of personnel at 84% loss, calculation to equipment 69%. Every time anybody looked at these numbers, and now that we're at peace, would say the same thing. That's a damn shame. Fast forward from their exodus to Earth to now, and the clitoris males and females are able to move amongst each other once again without any problem. There is, however, an open rule that everybody knows. If the females do not wish to risk pregnancy, the females are allowed to simply return to the Citadel, where they are given human protection and they can sit there and wait until the heat passes. Everyone's actually glad that the males don't go into rut, as any animal that goes into rut tends to be aggressive, to say the least. Everyone is also very glad to find out that interspecies children are just not possible. No matter what the sciences do, it doesn't matter if it's newcomer or human. It just doesn't work. Even though some would look at this as a good thing to know, unfortunately, as soon as this information was leaked out, most, if not all, of the human guards around the Citadel had to be rotated out because they were completely and totally drained, either mentally, physically, or both. Through all this, the Sarge actually keeps his two females close, and everybody now knows not to get too close to those females as they're under the Sarge's protection. They found this out because one of the brand new Marine guards decided to get a mouse in his pocket and decided to grab the sister's posterior as she went by, which was easy to get a hold of considering how little they actually wear, basically just like half a toga if you really want to get specific. They had to run this Marine into the regeneration facility as fast as possible to get him a new hand after the Sarge cut it off. There was, of course, an inquiry and turned out to be a press conference where everybody thought for sure that the Sarge was simply going to admit that he was taking both of them as his mates, as his lovers. Yet they were surprised when the Sarge said, "No, I don't touch either of them. I don't do that." And when pressed, asked why he still keeps both of them around, why he was so protective of the one that was grabbed, he simply stated, "She hasn't chosen a mate yet. When she chooses a mate, she's going to leave. And besides, wouldn't you protect your family?" This got everybody to raise their eyebrows a little bit and realized, yep, that's exactly what they're doing. Towards the end of the press conference, they asked the former queen a couple of questions. Unfortunately, the translator started going the fritz. At that point, she actually tried to speak human, yet, as it turns out, everybody still must use translators. As it turns out, their species doesn't really have a tongue, not the way we would actually look at it. When they got a new translator, they did ask her specifically why she sticks to him so close. Everybody had to understand that there was still parts of the clitoris culture that she's following, as she stated how she was so afraid to leave his side as she was afraid that someone else would claim him. Everybody kind of looked and was surprised at this, but they realized again, she's not human. After a few decades, everybody is ready to make contact with the rest of the universe. Everybody's ready to reach out into the stars. However, they're going to do it the old way. The plan is real simple. Their plan is to jump a ship to Mars, bust through, just like the clitoris had done on Earth, and then use the lighter gravity on Mars to get into space without having to burn up all their fuel. However, the idea of using rockets was something they just held on to. Nobody actually needed rockets anymore. They would also use an experimental FTL engine to explore the universe. Many people looked at this and said, yeah, ballsy. Stupid, but ballsy. Go ahead and do that. Unfortunately for everyone, they never got the chance. Less than a month before launch, giant monoliths pierced the surface of Earth similar to those that the clitoris had done before. These massive monoliths simply look like large versions of the tower in Washington, D.C., which has now been given back its original name of Rome. They rise slightly slower than the original citadels do, and they don't expand towards the base, no. Once they have their initial point through, they simply raise straight up. This allows them to not damage Earth nearly as bad. In actuality, just a couple of tremors. And as they stop rising, the Sarge is quoted on saying, "Aw shit, here we go again." This time, however, without pushing so much of the Earth's surface and subterranean areas aside, there are no huge weather patterns, no volcanic eruptions, no craziness to stop the monoliths from deploying. Though it's clear that they had less than half that the clitoris did when they poked their citadels through the surface of Earth, these new visitors also didn't lose as many due to collapse or being crushed in the ocean, though they did have a few, just not many. Most of these monoliths rose up either right next to or right through the citadels that remained or where they had started from before. To everyone's surprise, the one right next to the Sarge's citadel rose up just a few dozen meters away. The Sarge just happened to be up in the command center and immediately got on his translator and sent a message, "What is your intention?" Without a single response, the monolith began to open up its sides and deploy everything and began shooting. The Sarge immediately hit the comms to everybody and said, "Weapons free! I say again, weapons free! Light their asses up!" Within minutes, the sky around the monoliths are being completely surrounded by ordnance. Missiles came streaking in. Drones hovered around, firing whatever ballistic weapons they had and also dropping their own rockets and missiles. The anti-air artillery from all different sides of the citadel and meant to protect it rolled into position and simply rotated their turrets and began to tear everything apart. If it wasn't struck by the missiles or the drones, the anti-air artillery, the AAA, tore everything to pieces, and all their aerial devices began falling as though somebody had shot up a hornet's nest full of 10 cans of insecticide. The metal rain began to fall, and as it did, the large cannons from the citadel that the Sarge insisted on installing began to fire into the monoliths, pausing only to reload. He had made sure that they were well versed and well trained and made sure they did not miss. Ground forces of the new enemy barely were able to get out of their monoliths as artillery began to rain down on them. Militia forces began to spray into these new arrivals with full automatic weapons as they were going to be the first line of defense. This new enemy's infantry ran out and believed they would be safe from whatever was coming their way as they saw light streak across the sky and shoot up at them. They believed that their anti-energy shielding and armor would protect them. Each of the personnel and vehicles were colored in different shades, different bright colors to show ranks and positions, all of which were clashing with the foliage and topography of the surrounding area, which made them very easy targets. The new forces are unable to make headway at all as they are simply pounded from all directions, especially as soon as the regular military showed up with their heavier weapons. Seeing the citadel belching out fire and smoke, seeing those on the ground being torn to pieces, the Sarge opened up communications again and said, "Surrender or be slaughtered." The monoliths are currently being invaded on all sides at this point by human and Clitoris forces. The new Clitoris infantry are still skinny as all hell, but with far more defined musculature than they had before. And as he looks at them, he realizes they must have done some serious training as they look like they're at the peak of physicality for their species. He grinned a little bit, thinking, whoever's inside that big structure is really in trouble now. Unfortunately, the Sarge had to stay back no matter how much he wanted to charge forward like a rabid dog and rip the throats out of whoever decided to attack Earth this time. He had to coordinate reinforcements, rescue, and recovery efforts. The monolith that came out of the ground against his citadel allowed his forces to take command of it first, and because of this, he was the first one to receive a call as everything seemed to calm down. The Sarge told his ladies to stay and make sure this was not a trap. If he's killed, they are to do nothing except fire and fire and fire until that monolith is gone. The Sarge heads down and checks in with his people, links up and tries to figure out what in the hell was going on. As it turned out, his forces has actually captured the main chamber, the command structure, and the species, as he saw them laying on the ground, looked about the same size as humans, maybe slightly bigger. He thought to himself, then again, maybe it's just that carapace piece on top of their heads that makes them look a little taller. I don't know. The strange green humanoids started yelling and screaming at the translator as the Sarge walked in. He couldn't keep up, neither could the translator, and eventually an NCO walked up and mentioned how he had been challenged. What do you mean challenged? Sarge, that one there, he's in charge. He says if you refuse the challenge, he's going to self-destruct this monolith and take half the planet with him. And given the size of this thing, he might take half a continent, but it's enough. The Sarge walked forward a little bit and tried to figure out who it was, and then it didn't take long for him to see who was standing there holding that stupid decorative blade. All he could think of is, wow, deja vu. It all started the same as before. Everybody moved away, making enough room, more than enough room, actually. Many still clutched weapons as they realized if this duel was stopped in some way, if someone cheated, then the fighting would begin again. But nobody actually wanted that. They just wanted to figure out who won. The Sarge and his opponent stepped forward, pulling off the excessive decorations that the newcomer actually had. This seemed to be standard procedure, as it also raised its weapon into the air and yelled in an attempt to dominate the area. The Sarge actually had to send somebody back to get his weapons. He didn't realize that he would need his melee weapons for this, but he had one specially made. As he stepped forward and actually spoke into the translator, letting them know that somebody was gathering his weapons, the Sarge began to pull off his shirt, exposing not only all the scars, the so many scars, but also the fact that he had spent his time training as well. Along with that, the technology had allowed him to basically gain his 20-year-old self, well, more like his 20-year-old self on some extremely strong steroids. It wasn't long till somebody returned with his melee weapons. The Sarge reached over and pulled a broadsword out of its scabbard, and he would face this against that strange, goofy, curved blade. The new arrival looked a bit nervous as he saw that the Sarge didn't have just one, but two, each of them just as large as this blade, and he was moving them around with such ease, as the Sarge simply warmed up his shoulders for this. The new arrival, the one that challenged him, looked the Sarge up and down at his strange body, looking at each of the scars that the Sarge had simply left there to show. He saw the burns made, and this leader seemed to rethink his decision because he knew what those burns were. Those burns should have killed him. One should have killed him, and he has multiple on there? Yet it didn't matter. He was now in it to win it. They began looking at each other. They raised their weapons and charged forward. The enemy tried for a vertical slash, bringing the blade down with both hands. The Sarge simply moved one of the blades, parried with one hand, and thrust the other one forward and ended the fight quick. The blade had gone clean through the torso to the other side. The Sarge lifted him straight up and then flicked him off the blade like a booger. Then looked around the room and said, "Anyone else?" With that, everyone simply realized what had happened, at least on that citadel. The battle for Earth this time lasted less than a week. By this time, the Sarge had even more personnel around him, as now he controlled not only his citadel, but the monolith that was now attached to it. This new species, known as the Pervedes, had a very similar culture to the Clitris. Once the leader fell, the rest would immediately surrender. They were the epitome of cut off the head and the snake dies. Seeing this, all of Earth realized why the first invasion confused the hell out of the Clitris. They didn't understand the idea of fight to the last man. It was not part of their culture. It wasn't part of their training. It just wasn't part of them. Well, until now. Reading over everything and having seemingly endless meetings, it's clear that 88% of all material that was brought to the planet for this invasion can actually be recovered, along with 79% of Pervade personnel. One would think that similar cultures and similar tactics would lead to similar technology. Nope, that's 100% wrong. Looking across the information, it's very clear that utilizing both technologies and intermixing some human technologies would allow them to halt any further incursions unless they wanted them to happen. Anyone who simply tried, their machines would fail. It just wouldn't work. As well as they now had designs for even better engines that they now had to install on the ships they were going to take to Mars to search around the galaxy. This was definitely going to delay the blast off, but nobody really cared. Even though the Sarge has to deal with even more females now fighting for his attention, he needs more help to make sure he can manage everything, so he doesn't really worry about it. As the Sarge is in one of his many, many meetings with different personnel from different countries and different cultures, he's looking over all the new tech. New tech, as it turns out, can finally get them, when combined correctly, from Earth outside the radiation belts. They wouldn't even have to jump to Mars. It's going to take years and years before they can build the ships to do it. But they can finally reach out to the stars. The Sarge actually jumped to his feet and said, "Now that is what I call spoils of war." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on part 2 of The Spoils of War. Before I go, I need to send some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be Chris Dixon, MTF Guard, Erica Gem, Guardian Sage, Sir, Brian Kemp, and SS Demon. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.